Welcome to the third episode of the Communication and Behaviour Change Accelerator. In this session, we will explore approaches and provide practical examples of changing behaviours and challenging entrenched narratives. This is to drive genuine and lasting change, bringing the importance of water to wider audiences and contexts. To open the discussion, we will start with a talk from Raisa Mirza, the Director of Innovation and Knowledge at the One Drop Foundation. Raisa will talk about how behavior change can be a key to system change and why the One Drop Foundation's approach to using social art to achieve behavior change is such a powerful tool.
The song you just heard was called Chucuchu, Usted Está Peye, and was created with youth 18 to 12 years old from the municipality of Tumaco in Colombia within the framework of the Convidarte project implemented by Fundación Plan as part of the Lazos de Agua program. The song is the outcome of a process that engaged youth in this community to share the importance of washing their hands with soap and running water at key moments in a creative and fun way. This song reflects elements of the local culture and rhythm, and the local social artist group, ACOP, led the community in this participatory creative process, using local expressions. The lyrics of Chucuchu, Usted Está Peye, are about being not cool if you don't wash your hands with soap at key moments, such as before eating and after using the toilet. Chucuchu describes the movement of washing hands, though in Tumaco, people also use the word to refer to the sound of water being brought to the surface from underground wells. This video has been used by leaders of change of the project, in schools and in their social networks, becoming a tool inspiring more youth to wash their hands with soap and water. The instigator behind our foundation, Guy Laliberté, is well known for founding the Cercle du Soleil. When he founded the One Drop Foundation, he had a clear dream and mission, ensuring sustainable access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene for vulnerable communities around the world, and doing so through the power of social art. After almost 14 years, the dream still lives on through leaders of change, like these youth from Tumaco. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Siwi for the invitation to share our social art for behavior change approach with you today. The One Drop Foundation's approach to systems change is inspired by the Cercle du Soleil, and art is at its core. Art is in our DNA, and for Guy Laliberté, it is what allows us to change the world in a unique way. Our social art for behavior change approach, implemented alongside a systemic approach, helps create a sense of involvement, ownership, and empowerment in the communities we work with. It was clear for Guy Laliberté that providing safe water to communities alone is not enough to create sustainable change. It's just the beginning. And here, there is a missing link: the behavior of users. Collectively, we invest in building infrastructure, but not enough on making sure that people will use or maintain it. In fact, more than 30% of water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure fail after only 2 to 5 years. And even when the infrastructure does exist, people do not practice the key behaviors necessary to keep themselves and their families safe from preventable diseases, or the behaviors required to maintain this infrastructure. Sanitation facilities, if misused or unmaintained, often perpetuate open defecation. Consequently, feces contaminate surface and groundwater, food, and ultimately humans, exposing them to disease and infection. Water supply systems, if not operated and maintained, experience non-functionality issues. And menstrual hygiene, if not managed adequately, negatively affect people who menstruate, even when wash services are available. This is why behavior needs to be addressed and regularly practiced in order to contribute to the well-being of priority populations, even when infrastructure is part of the solution. This is where the emotional power of art comes in. At the One Drop Foundation, with art, we go beyond water infrastructure. We trigger emotions, action, and sustainable behavior change with the ultimate goal of changing and strengthening systems. We believe that social art create creative and interactive spaces and invaluable opportunities for people and communities to reimagine social norms that exist in their societies. Social norms are kind of the unwritten rules, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that are considered acceptable in a particular social group of culture. And artists, as social change leaders already embedded in their communities, are uniquely positioned to inspire, activate, and sustain new behaviors to support social norms change. So, what do we mean by behavior change? Well, behavior change is the process a person or group goes through when they abandon or improve an inadequate behavior or adopt and maintain a behavior that responds to a targeted need in a given context. We often describe this change in 5 steps. And to mirror these steps, One Drop Social Art for Behavior Change, or SABC interventions, inspire, activate, and sustain behavior changes through well-timed and targeted activities by and with the people we create with, based on understandings we have of the local cultural context and of our brains. Daniel Kahneman, a behavioral scientist, divides the mind's processes into 2 distinct systems. System 1 is reflexive and is the fast and intuitive part of your brain, while system 2 is the reflective part that is slow, analytical, and calculated. Both these systems must work together in order to help us adopt and maintain new behaviors. And how do we motivate these 2 systems? By building positive emotions and sensations associated with these new behaviors. Social art for behavior change interventions use concepts applied from a wide range of disciplines, from behavioral science, neuroscience, economics, human-centered design, and theater to support community-driven change through participatory processes that build an emotional connection with the topics at hand. We know information alone is not enough to change behavior. Strategies must not only provide information, they must also engage people's emotions and involve audience participation, ideally through several interactions with members of the group most able to drive change in their communities. And from murals to puppet theater to radio novellas, music videos, sculpture, clay animation, the One Drop Foundation has been lucky to support hundreds of social art groups across the world and through a variety of art forms adapted to the local cultural context to facilitate behavior change interventions on a range of behaviors related to water, sanitation, and hygiene. However, behavior change is not solely dependent on an individual or even a community. Contextual, psychosocial, and technological factors influence behavior change and affect sustained use of safe wash technologies at various levels in society, communities, households, and at the individual level. So you might watch a forum theater debate about using a latrine at your school, but if you go back home and have no access to a latrine, you will have no choice but to defecate in the open. And if you do not have the financial ability to pay for a latrine, then you won't be able to get one installed in your home to use it. That is why the One Drops Foundation's ABC for Sustainability model aims to ensure that water and sanitation facilities are available and sustainably managed in vulnerable communities. It is based on 3 pillars. The A stands for access. It involves the construction or rehabilitation of WASH infrastructure and the capacity building of community organizations and institutions. The B is about behavior. It means co-creating social art for behavior change interventions with priority groups to inspire, activate, and sustain improve safe and effective WASH practices. And the C is for capital. It aims to accelerate access to safe water and sanitation services at scale through market-based strategies, the development of adequate financial products for communities, households, and entrepreneurs, and through the development of the supply chain of WASH-related products and services. The ABC model for sustainability shows the interconnections and relationships that must be taken into consideration for a systemic understanding of WASH issues. It acknowledges the importance of creating an enabling environment for sustainable access to WASH. Social art for behavior change interventions are only successful when a program addresses the building of this enabling environment and system through a resilient WASH system transformation. As part of this process, identifying behavioral drivers and barriers through holistic and systemic research is extremely important in order to ensure the appropriate psychosocial, economic, historical, and political determinants are identified. This includes research on everything from understanding of local aesthetics to quantitative assessments of water-related issues and health outcomes. Whenever possible, we support artistic and creative research methodologies to support local communities in being part of the research steps. When we start a project, alongside close collaboration with government and local NGO partners, potential social artists are also identified through a scouting process and invited as part of the program design. The artists engage with the intended audience through initial research and prototyping visits in communities in order to refine their ideas and co-create together. Social artists are a part of the systemic interventions and of the planning process throughout the life cycle of a project. When participants engage together to decide on a script, to practice their play, or even to learn to use a video camera, golden bonds are created and behaviors are further embedded into a group as social norms. And when a final production takes place or is disseminated, the whole community is able to see that their fellow community members have worked together to produce works that are localized and which further helps in behavior change efforts through entertainment. The arts support addressing social issues that are often overlooked during awareness campaigns that are the norm of behavior change communication efforts. For example, portraying power dynamics between cleaners and doctors at a health facility, or taboo topics like menstruation to support real and sustainable change. In the last few years, we have turned a big focus on water, sanitation, and hygiene in health facilities. It is completely unacceptable that in 2021, during a pandemic, 2/5 of the world's healthcare facilities do not have access to clean water and soap. A variety of maternal health and child development outcomes could be met with this single target. In addition to infrastructure, hand washing with soap at critical moments must also be adopted by health practitioners. This necessitates appropriate budget allocations at a district level for both soap and for cleaning. But it also requires various stakeholders in the WASH system to come together and discuss the issues preventing safe water and sanitation at their local institution. As an example, in Mali and Haiti, we have supported creative and interactive workshops with artists, community members, hospital administrators, and staff to build a program together. Through theater and other creative processes, we were given a platform to express their concerns and to build rapport. This has further strengthened health facility teams to deliver better quality of care to patients. One-drop social art for behavior change approach has been deployed in a variety of ways and in a variety of contexts, from schools and communities to healthcare facilities in the last few years. It has been able to complement a variety of WASH approaches to support sustainable behavior changes in populations in over 15 countries. In fact, we will soon have transformed the lives of 2.3 million people through a systemic, creative approach. If you would like to learn more about this approach and its role in systems change, I invite you to visit our website and register for our e-learning course, Social Art for Behavior Change, The Basics, powered by the IRC WASH Systems Academy. From hand washing and latrine use to climate adaptation behaviors, we must move beyond awareness campaigns and focus instead on ensuring strong enabling environment towards resilient WASH systems. And art and artists are important leaders of change within a resilient and sustainable WASH system and play a key role in supporting behavior change initiatives. At the One Drop Foundation, we believe that art can change lives and turn water into action. We hope that you will join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Raisa for that inspiring contribution. And now I would like to welcome our panelists for the day. So I would like to welcome Kate Lamb, who is the Global Director of Water Security at CDP. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Anders. Very nice to meet you.
And Katie Velasco, the Senior Director of Partnerships and Engagement at RAS Center for Behaviour and the Environment. Hello to you, Katie.
Hi, great to see you.
And also Khadin Segish, who is the Senior Program Manager of Water Sanitation and Hygiene at Plan International. Hello to you, Khadin.
Hello, Anders. Thank you.
And Martine Visser, who is the Professor of at the School of Economics at the University of Cape Town. Hello, Martine.
Hi, Anders. Nice to meet you. Hi, everyone else.
Thank you all for participating in this session on behavior and behavior change and how to achieve it. So I would like to start with, in her talk, Raisa said that we invest in building infrastructure, but not enough to ensure that people will use or maintain it. So in other words, we invest a lot in building, but not actual behavior change. So do you agree with that statement? And if so, what do you think that is? So Katie, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that is a real challenge that we face in the world today. We invest in technology and we don't spend a lot of time in the adoption of that technology. And that can be a real challenge in understanding what would motivate people to adopt new technologies. We know that people have access to toilets around the world, but there are many barriers that exist beyond just having access to a toilet that allow for people to actually use it. And so we do think very carefully when we partner with different organizations around the world and thinking through how do we encourage adoption, what are the motivators for behavior change, what are the motivators to get people to move towards where we want them to go.
Thank you. And Khadin, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yes, I agree with Katie, and therefore also in the plan we're moving away from installing hardware to much more to the social software, we call it, the behavior change. So yeah, that's a turn we're making now because we saw it's installing the hardware is the easiest part. And then getting people in to use it, that is a challenge. So that's where we're focusing on now.
Right. And Kate?
Absolutely. While CDP's work isn't directly related to individual use of technologies or infrastructure or pieces of equipment, evidence certainly suggests that this is a problem. And of course, as the climate changes, the resilience of these pieces of technologies are likely to be significantly tested, and therefore will be increasing reliant on the people that are at the end of these pieces of technologies and the equipment that we're talking about here, in order to not only to use them wisely, but to use them even more efficiently, and indeed to take an active role in maintaining them. And if they don't have those skills, if the enabling environment is not there for them to do that, then ultimately we're in an unsustainable future.
Thank you. And you have all respective experiences coming into this discussion. So drawing from that, what have you learned are sort of main driving forces for people to change their behavior? So Martine, you have looked a lot on how Cape Town was saved from day zero. So what have you learned from that experience?
Yes, certainly there we saw that while people dramatically changed their behavior and households dropped their consumption by more than 50% over a 2-year period, what really made the massive difference to people's behavior was when the city started communicating very clearly to citizens by information on websites, over social media, etc., what the situation was and how dire and urgent behavioral change needed to happen. We saw that when they made the announcement about the disaster management plan and day zero was announced, is where we saw the biggest drops in consumption. We worked with both households and with schools, and also with the schools we saw that informational campaigns, competitions between schools, etc., can have incredible impact in motivating people's behavior.
I should started by asking you to say something about what day zero means.
So day zero was the focal point for when Cape Town was going to run out of water, when people would open their taps and nothing would come out, and we would have to line outside at standpipes to collect water. So this was a very day to be feared.
Right, thank you. And Kate, you have looked at a lot about businesses and the driving forces for businesses to change behaviors. And what have you learned from that?
That's very true. I've spent nothing but thinking about it for the last 10 years. They consume and influence up to 70% of the world's fresh water, and so play a fundamental role in ensuring that our water-related goals are met. And like with people and what Martine was saying around the competition element, CDP every year creates a competition amongst these businesses. We score and rank the behaviour that they're expressing or that they're disclosing publicly, and the progress that they're making towards achieving certain goals. And in a sense, we've created the Olympic Stadium, where we have the companies come and compete within that Olympic Stadium, and the institutional investors or large financial institutions are the spectators who are hoping for the winners to emerge. And that competition between firms is certainly a really important factor in ensuring that not only that they make strong commitments, but importantly, that they meet them.
Thank you. And Katie, you are also into the competition.
Yes, one of the things that our Center for Behavior and the Environment runs is this competition called Solution Search, and it uses the contest methodology to identify proven solutions that are applying behavioral insights to tackle environmental challenges. This past year, we're currently finishing up a contest on water pollution and behavioral insights applying water pollution. And when we look at what motivates behavior change, when we look across that contest, as well as other research we've done at the intersection of people and nature, we found that there are kind of 6 main drivers for change. There are 3 that play to one type of system of thinking that we heard about earlier. That's the information sharing, material incentives, whether they be financial or otherwise, or rules and regulation. But we also have a whole other set of drivers for behavior change that play to what we also heard is the other system of thinking that is more emotional. We have emotional appeals. We have social influences. We have a choice architecture, which nudges fall into of just the structure and timing of and context of our decision-making environment. And those combined are what really drive change from our perspective and what we've seen across the different contests as we've drawn out different answers around the world.
And Gerdine, you have worked with gender transformative WASH initiatives. What have you seen are the important factors to make people change behaviors?
Well, yeah, we're working with the gender transformative approach because we think, especially WASH and all the WASH-related activities are a responsibility for women and young girls. So, they have to fetch the water. They also are influenced negatively if they have to defecate in open air because it's dangerous, etc. So by creating a level playing field, we think by also include women in the decision-making processes, to also listen to them, what their needs are, is easier to convince also others in the community to practice hand washing and install a toilet, because we're working in a rural area where it's not normal to have a toilet, so we have to nudge people into that. And it's positive incentives, but you need to include women and girls in, especially adult women, in the decision-making process, because if not, you cannot change behavior, because for men, there is less incentive to change the behavior, their behavior than for women. So that's our main lesson learned from, and that's why we use the gender transformative approach.
And it's changing that behavior is to a great extent about changing social norms. So what are the greatest challenges in doing that? Gerdine.
I can maybe jump in there.
Oh, sorry, Martine.
Yeah.
No, because the work that we did in Cape Town, where we worked with several different behavioral nudges over a sample of more than 400,000 households, showed distinctly that it's so important to think carefully about heterogeneity within communities, because different communities and different groups will react to different types of nudges. And so we found that there was differences in how high-income households reacted to the nudges than to how the poorer households reacted. And the poorer households were more likely to react to financial messages because water is a relatively large part of their budget or the expenditure, whereas the high-income households responded much more to social recognition, the kind of emotive messages around public goods, etc. So I think that is a real important point that Katie also spoke about.
And Katie, would you like to add something about changing social norms?
No, I mean, I think social norms are, just as social systems are, incredibly complex and things that we can't necessarily, unless we are part of those social systems, understand. And so one of the things that we heard in the video earlier is about this concept of participatory processes and designing solutions with and for the people who are or the recipients of the solution. So we have to be, when we're tackling social norms, really careful about coming in from the outside and instead spending our time listening and co-designing and really understanding how and what is important to people and what they want to change, rather than infusing our perspectives on it.
And if I may come in at that moment, I think what's interesting about social norms, however, is that when they are translated into a business setting, so yes, we can influence the workforce of a particular organisation because we are ultimately all of those. We're sitting there being nudged in one way or the other at home. However, when you join an organisation, when you become part of a business, you're then subject to their rules, who are then subject to a whole different set of motivators or incentives or disincentives that are set by policymakers, either nationally or internationally. And so there's a fascinating interchange that goes on where some people can leave their certain behaviours, certain characteristics that they would do in their own local community and somehow get away with it a little bit more when they're within the business setting. And that's fascinating.
There's actually, even building on that, because it is true, on this business setting creates a more kind of rational side or different decision making than we would as individuals. There was an interesting study that came out of the state of Kansas in the United States, which looked at social norms when applied to wastewater treatment. And they even found that social norms communicating what other wastewater treatment plants were doing to certain treatment plants does have a pretty significant impact in terms of how businesses will change. And so the idea about that Kate's been working on in terms of comparing businesses to one another, what are the norms between businesses? We like to think about companies as these kind of purely rational, maximizing beings, but social norms also do play a role once we get into the weeds of it.
Khadin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I was thinking we are working in a quite different environment than you are, I think, because we are in the rural parts of Africa and Asia, and there people even don't have a sanitation. They don't have access to, the water points are far away. So, and then it's also, but we're working about social norms, we're working in a local context, so we have a gender wash monitoring tool, and we adopt it to the local context. We involve local leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders. We really look at what is normal locally, and then we start working. But that's quite challenging because, to give an example, explain to people why you have to wash hands. They have to go far away to get the water. They need soap. They can't afford it, and then they look at their hands, and if they are more or less clean, they think, well, why should we bother? So that's quite challenging to get the behavior change. COVID helped a lot because then it was on television, radio, and everybody was starting washing hands. But to people install in sanitation and a toilet at their compounds, that's quite challenging because it's cost, they don't have the money. And also to go in the open air, they don't have to queue, it's not a smell. And that's the male part, because for women, it's another story. Because for them, it's much more safer to have a toilet on their compounds. But that's quite a long-term way of working. It's not easy. So it's a really quite other environment than what you're talking about. What I hear from you, it is interesting. For me, it's also to learn and then see. But we are really at the lower level. It's
yeah.
Just to jump in there.
Yeah.
What is also interesting from these kind of long-term trajectories is that what we saw in Cape Town was there was so much effort around getting households to reduce their consumption during that moment of the water disaster. But 2.5 years later, 3 years later, households haven't actually increased their consumption significantly again. And so there's really been incorporation of those norms around people's behavior and how they utilize water on a daily basis.
So, and adding to that, we have a lot of crises now in the world. We have climate change, we have the water crisis, and as we have seen during the pandemic, it's changing people's behavior can actually go quite quickly when there's a sort of a pressing urgency. But how can we create the same sense of urgency even when the problems might not feel as pressing when you are in different sort of contexts? So what are some ways we can do that? Katie?
Sure. Well, I think when we're creating urgency, we should really be strategic about why we're creating the urgency and having a horizon for what we're looking out for the change to happen. I think with the pandemic and what we've seen with climate change is that a lot of times that comes from fear-based messaging. And we have to be really careful with fear-based messaging because what it can do is it kind of gets back to that part of our brain that sees a lion or a grizzly bear and kind of spurs an immediate reaction in terms of survival. And the challenge is that when we've seen this with COVID is that over time, that kind of fear can erode, or we kind of fall back into our old habits because we've gotten tired of wearing masks and we don't want to return to that, or we've gotten tired of not traveling. And so when we create this urgency, I think we have to be very careful in terms of the levers that we're using and what we call a behavior-centered design process, or really kind of strategically go step by step in understanding how do we get to that point without kind of creating false motivators that might not stick in the long term.
And
I think it's really the golden question ultimately, Anders. I think everyone within the water community have been trying to answer this question for the longest possible time. We've been talking about the global water crisis for decades now, and yet fundamental policy shifts that ultimately address the issue are not yet emerging. I completely agree with Katie that the fear-based approach is certainly limited. It has its place, for sure. There's no question about it. It works, it's effective. But arguably, I think presenting a vision of the future that we really want and then racing towards that is what we're seeing as a successful strategy being deployed within the climate community at the moment. And so creating things like ambition loops, where we have one set of actors really setting a leading position in the hope that that then inspires others, either policymakers or businesses or financial institutions or citizens themselves, to mirror and reflect that and in fact beat that ambition and go further, is again another tactic that we're seeing being deployed in the climate community that seems to be having an effect.
Yes, and what we also see in our communities that people already mentioning for quite some time, yes, there is a climate problem, we have too much water or it's a drought. And that's also why we decided we're working now much more, not just on wash, but what we call pre-wash, that you include the whole landscape approach. And because it's much more, it's a guarantee the source, the water source for a long time. So just focus on wash is not enough, because you can change behavior, but if people don't have water, and we saw that during now in COVID time in Zambia, there's a continuous drought, so people had no access to water. So when we're talking about hand washing, yeah, okay, with what? They started again with using ashes, because that was the old habit. And yeah, we cannot just tell them, yeah, you have to wash with water, because they cannot afford soap and there was no water. So what to do about that? So we thought we have to go much more to the source of the problem, and that's the climate change. It's not only behavior change, but it's much broader for them. They already experience it day to day. So that is quite another challenge we encountered.
I do think we can use the lesson from Cape Town, where we've seen longer term behavioral change because of the urgency that was created during the drought. There's some research into behavioral change that Professor Emily Balsitis at NYU is busy with, for instance, where they're looking at how vision and goals impact people's ability to reach their goals in a shorter term period. And I think if we can use those kind of lessons at times where there are urgency, like during summer where there's water scarcity, and get people to change their behavior, maybe change technologies that they're using, which is more sort of aimed towards water saving, we can create sustained longer term usage through that. So it's a sort of strategic use of those moments.
Yeah.
So, and that's the key question. How do we induce behavior change that lasts through a sort of short campaign or something like that? So, what are some key factors to achieving this lasting change? We heard some examples from Martine. What do you others say about that?
I'd say from my perspective, it's consistency in the messaging, ensuring that you use the term a short campaign. I'm not sure of the validity of having a short campaign in trying to address such a global problem, and one that really does need to be consistently addressed every year, every month, every day. And so having consistency of a message, tracking progress publicly, and ensuring that is one, celebrated where success has been achieved, but also acknowledging where success is not happening and finding out why that's the case, and either nudging or something a bit more severe if needed, certain actors in certain directions. But it's a long-term commitment from those of us on the call and in the water community more broadly that is required to ensure consistent messaging and tracking and accountability for that change.
Yes, and additionally to that, what we do as Plan, we work with local government, national level, but also with the communities, and we train the local officers also in behavior change, the need for behavior change, and it's also in the policies, and we go back and again to the communities with working with local champions of change. So I think that's the reinforcement of over and over again repeating your message, but also involve the local stakeholders, that they're also aware of the need because we cannot be there all the time. So the moment we leave, then that local government is aware, and local traditional leaders, religious leaders, that it has to be done forever. And that's also where we went back, reinforce. It's and that's very important.
Martine?
No, I agree with what the other speakers has said, and I think that in that sense, also what Kate is pointing out, this kind of longer term consistent messaging is very important. But we need to look at how salience is brought into that messaging, so that different user groups clearly understand what is being communicated to them, and especially when we're working with people from different demographics, where there's different burning issues, which can also distract behavior, and bringing it back to what is important to them on the ground. And I think that's what Gideon is also pointing out.
Yeah.
And Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of the other panelists and what they're saying. I mean, our work at the Center for Behavior and the Environment has been based in RARE. It's a nonprofit that I work for that hosts the Center for Behavior and the Environment. And we've spent over 40 years in 60 different countries and 300 different communities. And it is true that you need to be focused on building local capacity, partnering with local audiences, ensuring that they are kind of the driving forces behind the change to encourage that it lasts long after you have kind of left that community. I would say one of the things at the center that we spend time thinking about too is on how do we make these behaviors observable? And so are there ways to reinforce what's happening, particularly in some of these settings, so that people see their neighbors, their friends, their peer groups doing what we want them to do? And so then they are kind of reinforced that that is the norm and then that is something that they should be doing. And that can often help in kind of accelerating the change or keeping it around if it's observable.
Yes, to give an example, what we always do, if a community gets the open defecation-free levels, then we have a certification ceremony, and we also invite other communities. Mm-hmm. So, and then we see the people of the community that get certified is very proud, and the others are, how did you do it? And they are so enthusiastic. So it's seeing, it's knowing and doing. See others do it. That really works. It's and we come back, or not we, but the local people come back every year to celebrate. So your 1 year ODF, 2 year ODF. So it's always a small party. So that really is an incentive for other communities to do this, the same, to follow.
One of the things that we often building off that, one of the things that we often talk about when we're evaluating where a community stands in different adoption of different techniques is when you just spoke about knowing, it's both knowing what you believe and also knowing what you think others believe. And that has been kind of a barrier that we've identified, particularly in certain communities related to climate change, which is people believe that it's a problem, but they don't necessarily believe that other people believe that there's a problem. And so there's a lot of work that can be done in the messaging and demonstrating that their peers and others do believe it. And that can kind of help get to the next step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you to you all for participating in this session and for this very lively and engaging discussion. Thank you very much for your contributions. And thanks again to our lead partner, the Grundfos Foundation. Don't forget to look at More Than Words, showcasing effective storytelling on water and where visual and performing artists address urgent climate and water issues. You can find these events on the center stage. Join us again tomorrow for the 4th episode of the Accelerator on Communication and Behavior Change. Thanks again for watching and see you soon.